Welcome to the Escape the Drift podcast. I am Dr. Jacob Egbert, and today the topic is a beautiful death. Now, I've had a few posts. I've seen a lot of things recently in my social media as I'm watching the feed that comes up, the things people are talking about, centered around death here and there. There are a lot of recent deaths attributed to vaccination. There are deaths attributed to suicide, and that seems to be the most prominent one. Now, I'm no stranger to experiencing suicide with someone close to me. My brother committed suicide 17 years ago, little over 17 years ago. And the experience that put me and my family through lives on. It's still painful, it's still sad, it's still impactful. Now, I don't want to talk about that today, other than to say that I've had the experience. It's quite traumatic. It lingers. And this is the one thing that I do want to say about that. You know, that we talk often about, or we hear this talked about, that it's a selfish act. And obviously it is. It's incredibly selfish. And I'm not here to shame anyone or talk ill of anyone that has chosen that path. Although every now and then I get angry at my brother, for example. And the other day, even I was in here, I was talking to my wife, and I'm like, what a dumbass. You know, like, I have those feelings of why do something like that? You're 24 years old, your whole life's ahead of you. These momentary problems, and he'd be 40 now, almost. Yeah, 40. He'd be 40 this year. And it's like so much life lost. So I have those feelings. I have that reaction to the experience of being close to someone who commits suicide. Now, accidental death, disease death, etc., you know, you don't have that same reaction because it was perceivably, not to say it's true. I don't know the full mechanics of the experience. Maybe others have that have had failed experiences where they attempted and then it didn't work out. So they could speak to this. That there is control, that you have the choice in the moment. I don't know. Not speaking to that. And the pain that continues, the loss. You know, a 40-year-old, he could have been married and had kids and a whole life. We'll never see it because of a choice made in a moment of despair. And that's unfortunate. So I bring that up only to highlight one end of the spectrum of death, and that is choice. And I'm going to get into that here with the title of A Beautiful Death momentarily. So my experience in the world of death, I've had a few, I guess you could say, exposures to people dying. I'm a physician. I've worked in hospitals. I've been at the bedside of a number of people who have died. I have been responsible for people who have died, you know, in the night when I wasn't there. And a number of experiences where my patients have died within hours of me having seen them. So I don't know how many, you know, maybe 10 or 15, somewhere in that range. So I've experienced the end of life for many people. In our home this year, or last year, 2022, my mother-in-law, my wife's stepmom, she passed away of cancer in our living room, having lived with us for a year prior. And we got to experience that firsthand. So death occurs, obviously. We had the beginnings of a pregnancy a few years back where it was ectopic. It never materialized beyond a few weeks, yet the experience of losing potential life was also in our realm. Okay. Grandparents, friends, accidents. I've had a lot of exposure to or experience with people in my life dying, as I think all of us have or will. Now, I bring all of this up yet again. I'm going to get to the point here soon, in that I've seen the end of life for disease. For example, my mother-in-law, who battled pancreatic cancer for a little over a year. She lived in our home for just over a year. And having experienced that decline from diagnosis to death was long and at times painful and uncomfortable and challenging for all those that were participants in the care. And then I've seen in the hospital settings where it can be more acute, an immediate heart attack that doesn't immediately kill you, but eventually within a day or two or hours with CPR and other interventions results in death. And of course, you've got the end of life, like old age, just this years-long decline until one little thing tips over into death. I've seen prolonged life extension working in ICUs where people are kept alive for sometimes months with no expectation for regain or return of any quality or meaning to their lives. I've seen experiences where people give up, and sometimes that's appropriate. There will be elderly people with diseases that their bodies are just hanging on by a thread and they won't let go because their kids still have an emotional connection to them being alive. And when the kids finally say, okay, we're okay with this, then within hours sometimes they'll die. It's like they're hanging on for permission, waiting for that permission to go. Now, why do I title this A Beautiful Death? And I think the purpose of this is to say, death is inevitable. We're all going to die. That is the one thing that's certain. If you've been born and are alive, you will die. Now, I speak frequently of the life force, that thing that progresses and grows. And at some point, perhaps it peaks and then the decline occurs until it's over, or it can be abrupt. And so life force, that upward trajectory, will come to an end, and then it will be the downward spiral to the ultimate destruction of life or death. And how do you want that to occur is the big question. How do you want your life to end? Now, some clearly choose the path of suicide, and they'll just end it immediately through often violent means. Okay. Perhaps their life was so painful leading up to that event that they saw no other way. And the only way to relieve that excruciating discomfort would be to call it. It's over. Okay. No judgment of that, other than occasionally I get upset or angry or sad by the loss that I feel and what I see as a potential that was not taken advantage of. Okay. Well, let's say you get to the end of your life and you're in decline. I'm assuming all of you listening or watching will say, I do not want to prolong suffering or be debilitated and dependent. And I've seen this over and over and over in my hospital experience, where these people get to a point where they're helpless. They've reached the point where they can no longer powerfully direct their lives. They're at the mercy of, and oftentimes the decisions of, those that are close to them. And there are a lot of systems in place to prevent, or at least to help with that. Advanced directives are highly recommended. And I wouldn't wait on that. An advanced directive is a document where you actually direct how the end of life will occur if you're unable to make decisions. And that can be as complicated as choosing which medications that you'll be okay with and not okay with, which levels of treatment you'll be okay with and not okay with, feeding tubes or oxygen or ventilators. You get to just cherry pick how it all goes, assuming those things come up as needed interventions. Or you can be as simple as don't do anything. Or you can be as simple as do everything possible. So the advanced directive is an opportunity for you to document and communicate clearly prior to an unexpected event. And anyone could be rendered incapable at any moment. You're in a car accident, you get a brain injury, you're unable to communicate. Well, do you want your family hanging on to you for potentially years in a vegetative state? Those are questions that you've got to answer, or you have the opportunity to answer for them, so they don't have to be put in that position to guess and wish and wonder. Because oftentimes they'll do more than you may have wanted. Okay. So there's two parts to this. One being, how do you want to live your life up to that point? How do you want to put yourself in position to die quickly? Die quickly. My preferred saying, or preferred outcome, if I could choose, would be to live long, die fast. And live long meaning having vitality and life and capacity and capability up until the last moment, and then something happens and boom, it's over. Versus that prolonged, degrading decline until you're debilitated and dependent for who knows how long, years to months in someone else's care. And then eventually just slowly the flame goes out. I don't want that. So personally, what I've done is I put myself in a position to have optimized health. I want to be as robust and capable and able until I get older. I'm gonna be fit and vital until my 80s or 90s. That's my goal. I'm gonna put things in place. I'm gonna live my life in such a way that that is likely. Now, barring unforeseen disease or other thing, that's where my life is going. So, live long, die fast. Now, dying fast isn't always up to you, unless you have this advanced directive and you live in a state where maybe assisted suicide is a possibility. Now, that contrasts with how I opened this, with the suicides that we see in desperate youth, or not so youth, but otherwise capable and engaging people. So, assisted suicide, let's talk about that briefly. Now, I'm an advocate on some level of the opportunity to participate in an assisted suicide. And this is where the beautiful death comes in, and I'm going to get into my personal designed beautiful death plays into this. Now, assisted suicide is a situation in certain states, it's legal, where you go through a process where you can seek medical assistance in ending your life. If you have a terminal illness and there's unending suffering and it's terminal, like it's not like there's a way out, you can elect for an assisted suicide to bypass that end of life suffering. Now, there are a lot of requirements for that, and if you're curious, you can go look it up. You know, Washington State is where I lived previously, and that system was one where it was, I believe, somewhat pioneered for the country. Now, my wife and I actually made a movie about this. She's a filmmaker, and we both starred in a narrative feature film, A Worrisome Thing. It's on Amazon and anywhere else you find movies. A Worrisome Thing, you'll see me as a headlining actor alongside my wife, and we produced and she produced it. I helped her. She directed it. I also helped a little bit. But essentially, it's a movie that has an underlying theme of assisted suicide. Kind of interesting. Now, moving on. My beautiful death. And this is something I've told this story many times to people in my life because I want it to be clear. And whether they'll actually help me with this or not, if the situation arises, will be determined or to be seen, hopefully. So this is it, my beautiful death. If ever I get to an end of life situation where there's no light at the end of the tunnel, that whatever malady I'm faced with is inescapable. My condition is terminal and only faced with decline and suffering and dependence and essentially debilitation and into the fog of medical lights beeping and tubes and everything else you can imagine in a hospital setting that would lead to death. Let's say that's imminent, but I'm coherent and I'm able prior with my capacities to feel and to think, but my body is going down. Here's the beautiful death that I request. And it's dramatic in some ways, yet to me, extremely beautiful. And I think about it regularly as a very powerful way to say thank you to life. Now, there are things in my own experience that are thrilling. Now, here's the setting. And somehow I'm incapacitated, but I have my senses. I want to be thrown off a cliff into water, cold, deep water. Now, I say that initial thrown off the cliff because I love the feeling, the sensation of acceleration and free fall. I love to jump off bridges and cliffs. There's very few things that are more thrilling than that. That acceleration, the wind, the anticipation of the splash at the bottom. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful sensation. It doesn't require anything. You can be incapacitated and thrown off a cliff. Now, cold water. I want to land in cold, deep, dark water. I want that thrill, that initial shock of the cold. I want to feel the sensation of that immediate change in temperature. I regularly experience that in my own day-to-day life. I take a cold shower every single day. Not entirely. I start with warm, I do my stuff, and then I end it with pure cold. I ice bath regularly. I have for the last 11 years. I jump in mountain lakes. I'll swim in rivers in the spring with the ice melt. I love the experience or the sensation of the bitter, shocking cold. So part 2, the thrill of the jump, the thrill of the land in the cold water. Now the last part, there's 2 parts to this. So the third part would be the descent into the dark. I've done a lot of diving. I've done a lot of whitewater kayaking. I've done a lot of swimming in mountain lakes and rivers. And there's something about the depth where there's darkness and you look up and you see the light and you can see the contrast of the water color or light temperatures, whatever you want to call that. So I want to descend into the dark, the unknown, the abyss. There's something fascinating to me about the experience. There's fear, there's an unknown, and that's beautiful. And then the last part, and this is where it gets more poignant and perhaps a little hard to fathom. With the shock of the cold and the descent into the deep, there will be a moment where I can no longer hold the water out of my mouth, my nose, my lungs. And there will be one last fight for life. And perhaps that's the most beautiful part. When everything else is taken away and you feel helpless and hopeless, and you get one last moment to say no. There's a story that goes along with this. A man, his child was being attacked by a coyote, and he grabbed the coyote, tackled it, and he put his hands around its neck to squeeze the life out of it, to protect his child. He didn't know what else to do. And while he's squeezing the life out of this coyote, he remarked how shocking it was, the fight that this coyote had to stay alive. And that's what I want, one last time. One last fight with everything I have within me for life. I succumb, and it's over. And it was beautiful. There's so much to live for. There's so much to experience, and so many experiences to have that are painful, that are sad, that are beautiful. So much opportunity to grow. So much happiness, so much pleasure. I don't want to go out with sedating medications and no, this life is too precious, far too beautiful. I want to go out fighting if I get my choice. Because if it's not that, it's likely something quick, sudden, and accidental or otherwise, and then there is no issue. And hopefully I had a fight right before the lights go out. Life is beautiful. Every last piece of it. Stay in the game. If you've got anything that's wearing on you, anything challenging, look at that challenge as a fight. Look at it as an opportunity. Hang on. Persist. You know, it's cliche, but there's always a better day. There's always some sunlight on the other side of darkness. No matter what you have to go through to get there, fight. This is the Escape the Drift podcast, and I am Dr. Jacob Egbert.